I don't exactly live an exciting life, but when people ask me for a scary story, this is always the one I share. It happened when I was 15, just about to start my sophomore year of high school. I grew up in a typical beach town, packed with tourists during the summer, but a ghost town the moment the season ended. As soon as the crowds disappeared, the bars and restaurants shut their doors, leaving just the locals, the sky, and the ocean. If you've never experienced the shore in the off-season, you're missing out. I highly recommend it. There's something incredibly strange yet calming about it, almost like the whole place belongs only to you. It may sound cliché, but our house sat on a street called Surf Avenue, just a block from the beach. Funny enough, I know how to surf. It would have been pretty embarrassing to live on Surf Avenue and not even know how to ride a wave. I'd spent my whole childhood there, so the boardwalk and sand were practically embedded in my routine, and honestly in my personality too. I don't live in that specific house anymore, but the property has stayed in the family, so it still feels like a piece of me. Back then, I was on my high school varsity cross-country team, and I was pretty obsessive about staying in shape, even during the off-season. Summers down the shore get insanely hot, so I usually ran super early in the morning or late at night, times when I wouldn't melt in the heat or be that jerk weaving through crowds of tourists. One night, I decided to go for a late-night run. I'd stayed up pretty late with friends the night before and slept in that morning, so I didn't have much of a choice. I never brought my phone with me when I ran. It was annoying not having music, but honestly, even that extra little bit of weight was enough to throw me off. I don't know if they still make them, but I had this rinky-dink little Garmin watch that I used to track my distance and pace. Besides that, the only other thing I'd carry was my house keys. To put it mildly, my parents were incredibly uptight about keeping the house locked. As annoying as it was, I had no choice but to stuff my house keys in my shorts pocket every time I went for a run. Even if they were home, it was a non-negotiable rule. I still don't fully understand why they were so concerned about it, especially in a place like ours, where most private beach towns are super safe. But that's neither here nor there. That night, I decided to stick to the boardwalk. The surface was just soft enough to be easy on my legs, but not as brutal as running on the sand. Sometimes I'd jog along the beach for a challenge, but after the day I'd had, I just wanted a nice, easy, long run with minimal changes in elevation or terrain. The boardwalk would give me just that. I started zoning out after a few miles, enjoying that euphoric runner's high. I always tell people, even today, that if you can break that first mental barrier, which usually happens after about 3 miles or so, the rest of the run is easy and almost enjoyable. Anyway, I was lost in the rhythm of my steps, listening to the slap of my shoes against the wood while also trying to concentrate on the distant sounds of the ocean. I was in that perfect zone where you forget you're even running. And then I heard it. A faint clink. I stopped and checked my pocket. Empty. My stomach dropped. It was my keys. I crouched down, peering through the gaps in the boardwalk, but it was useless. It was pitch black under there, and there was no way I'd even be able to retrieve them from where I stood. I started cursing, literally yelling out loud. I know it sounds a little silly, but the adrenaline from the run was still pumping, and I was pissed that this detour had completely ruined my run. I knew my parents would have killed me if I came back without those keys. So, without really thinking, I jumped off the side and headed down to the sand. It was also partly a matter of pride. I wasn't just going to walk away from one of my personal belongings. Who does that? The smell under the boardwalk hit me instantly. It was like rotten seaweed mixed with stale beer. That's honestly the best way to describe it. Imagine literally filling a bathtub with seaweed and beer. It was damp and heavy, and every step I took kicked up sand and trash. Like I said before, I didn't have my phone with me, so the backlight on my watch was the only thing guiding me, and it wasn't doing much. I crouched down to the spot where I thought my keys had fallen, but they were nowhere in sight, just more clumps of sand and scraps of garbage. I'll repeat myself. It was disgusting, but I needed those keys. I thought about just leaving them, but then I decided that I had come this far. Turning back now would mean getting covered in garbage and stench for nothing. I started shifting the sand around a bit, thinking maybe they had fallen beneath the surface, but after a few minutes, frustration started to creep in. Had I really misjudged the spot by that much? I concluded that the most rational explanation was that I had somehow misjudged where they had fallen. I climbed back up to the boardwalk, stood where I had stopped running, and thought about how I could be sure of the spot underneath. That's when I had a genius idea. I could use my shoelace as a marker. I knelt down, untied it, and slipped it between the planks, letting it hang. That way, I could crawl back under the boardwalk and spot it from below easily. But as I was standing back up, something tugged on the lace, and it instantly disappeared into the crack. It wasn't a breeze. It wasn't me moving weirdly. Something from below had pulled it. I couldn't believe my eyes. I was literally in shock. Someone had pulled it. I took a step back and stared at the spot where my shoelace had just been. There was someone underneath the boardwalk. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Whoever was under there probably had my keys, too. My first instinct was to run home and figure it out later. But the thought of someone having my house keys, knowing where I lived, made my blood boil. Our house address was etched into them, so I couldn't just leave some stranger with that kind of access. I still don't know why I did it. Call it stupid teenage confidence, but I took a deep breath, jumped back into the sand, and crawled under again. It felt different the second time. The air was heavier, and I was bracing myself for some kind of fight. At one point, I heard faint shuffling somewhere ahead of me, and my chest tightened. I swung my watch light toward the sound but saw nothing. Just more sand and beams. I kept moving, and then I heard it again, shuffling, but this time from a different direction. That's when I realized the noise wasn't coming from one spot. There were multiple people under there. That realization hit me like a ton of bricks. Common sense struck me in the face like a freight train. What in the world had I expected to happen? Was I really going to fight some crackhead living under the boardwalk? That was suicide. I turned to get out of there, trying not to panic. But before I could make it all the way out, something cold latched onto my ankle. It was a hand. I screamed in pain as fingernails dug into my skin. I didn't think, I just kicked as hard as I could. My foot connected with something, and whoever had been holding onto my ankle let go. I scrambled away, my legs and arms scraping against the sand and wood as I pushed myself out into the open air. I didn't stop running. I sprinted straight back to my house. When I reached the front door, I pounded on it until my dad opened. To say he was pissed would be a massive understatement. He was livid. I was surprised he didn't get physical with me. Before my dad could fully flip out, I explained everything. The keys, the shoelace, the people under the boardwalk. The commotion woke my mom, who was furious at first, but when she saw the marks on my ankle, her expression shifted to something closer to fear. My dad didn't waste any time. He called the police. The next morning, we had a locksmith come out and change all the locks on the house. For a couple of days, things felt normal again. I figured that was the end of it. Just a weird, messed up night that I'd try to forget. But then, a few mornings later, I woke up to loud knocking at the front door. It was early, way too early for visitors. I sat in bed for a while, waiting for my parents to deal with it. When neither of them did, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I pulled on a hoodie and went downstairs. I looked through the peephole, but there was no one there. Confused, I opened the door and looked around. No one in sight. I glanced down the street. No cars, no people. Just as I was about to close the door, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. Sitting on the doormat was a shoelace. My shoelace, the one from that night. I slammed the door shut without another thought. We got a security system installed that afternoon. For weeks after that, my family lived in constant fear, but nothing ever happened again. When I think back to that experience, I still can't rationalize the events that took place. Even though I don't live in that house anymore, it still creeps me out that some random stranger knows where our beach house is.